Well, things seem to be changing in financial markets. Prices haven't changed yet. There hasn't been any massive, unraveling of this, financial asset bubble that we've been sitting on for years now. But attitudes of, mainstream financial normies are starting to change, and people are starting to sound a lot more like, me or Peter Schiff or Jeff Gundlach. And I think, we're getting to the point to where, the Fed may have gone too far with all of their shenanigans trying to prop up, this bubble. I think that the normies are starting to catch on. Folks look and they see millions and millions of people unemployed, the highest unemployment since the Great Depression, the highest unemployment, in really anybody's lifetime, except for some select older folks. I think I have a grandparent who was alive during the Great Depression, so she probably remembers unemployment being worse than it is now. But nobody else really does. There's riots in the streets. We're witnessing a cultural revolution, people tearing down statues of not only Confederate generals, but the Founding Fathers. And so there's absolute mayhem. You've got people who can't work. Who can't afford anything. We have the economy now, not really able to open back up much because so many more people are getting sick from this virus, we're being told. And yet, the NASDAQ is at all-time highs. Something just doesn't match up. And so ordinary people, the kinds of folks who just, like the board, go and buy stocks. They take money out of their paycheck every week and they go buy more stocks, and they buy stocks, and they buy stocks. They're looking at what's going on and they're saying, you know what? Things just seem too darn expensive. And so they're having to look around and say, gee, we've got all these things going against, this market. Why are assets so expensive? Why are stock prices so high? I mean, you have all these companies. There's companies like Hertz that are literally bankrupt and their stock goes through the moon. Why might this be happening? And the obvious answer that people are figuring out, including Tim Seymour on CNBC, is, well, it's just the Fed. The Fed is pumping money into the markets in the same way that I've been talking about since I started this channel. This is why asset prices are so sky high and have been so sky high. This is why, after the 2008 crash, people went through a time of financial misery, but yet stocks very quickly bounced back and reached new highs fairly quickly. It's because the Fed is dedicated to never letting Wall Street lose money. The Fed just essentially cuts checks to Wall Street and hands out free money to enrich themselves and their friends. And that's not news to me. So, hearing someone say that on CNBC isn't going to affect my actions any, because I've already factored that knowledge into my thinking. Not that I have much money to throw around anyway. I'm not some big investor. I'm young. I don't have any money to invest. But these boomers and these Gen Xers who watch CNBC, who think when they buy stocks, like if they buy shares of Facebook or something like that, they think they're buying, the value that this company produces. They think that they're getting a share of the production, of these corporations. And that's not what they're buying. What they're really doing is they're buying into, a Fed liquidity-driven price scheme. And so that's when things start to get dangerous, when ordinary people start to figure this out. They say, I don't really own anything of value. That doesn't really make sense. My stocks are only worth money because the Fed says they're worth money. Maybe I don't want to own these stocks. Maybe people start to get concerned that, just how fragile is, my financial well-being. I've made a lot of money in the stock market recently. Do I really want to risk that by holding it when there seems to be no underlying value that's tangible, that I can, hang on to, that I can, conceptualize in my mind that it's all just, a Fed game? This is a very dangerous mindset for the Fed, because the reason why the Fed is able to prop up asset prices the way that they have for so long is because people like me are such a small minority. If somebody like me, were to say something like that, Neil Kashkari would call me a QE conspiracist. To say that the Fed is affecting asset prices is just a conspiracy theory, and then he smirks and and chuckles with his buddies about how, haha, aren't we rich bankers so smart? Those dumb rubes in their trailer parks, they think that we're just enriching our friends and that we're a bunch of corrupt bankers. So shaming people like me worked for a long time. But the thing is that in their success in sidelining folks who pointed out the absurdity of the Fed's actions, the Fed has gotten arrogant. They've gotten much more blatant in their actions, to the point where even if everyone who thought like me, who believes in sound money and capitalism, in the actual traditional sense, where profit and loss and things like that, and supply and demand determine prices and production. Even with us out of the picture, the normies who don't have a particularly deep understanding of how these things work can still look at what the Fed is doing and say, that doesn't make any sense. It's starting to look like a joke to them. And Tim Seymour, just a CNBC normie, said that last night. He said capitalism is dead. He said, sure, are stocks overvalued? Hell yeah. But I mean, what's going to happen if they start to go down? The Fed's just going to buy a few more billion in corporate bonds, drive down yields, and push some more people into the stock market. So how, who is he to say whether you should, buy or sell? Because the price doesn't matter. Reality doesn't matter. The only thing that's driving prices is the Fed. And the more people realize that, the more diminished the Fed's ability to manipulate these prices becomes. Because if everybody knew that the Fed was the driver behind all this, well then the game wouldn't work. Because the Fed's manipulation only works if they're able to trick people. And once the Fed is no longer able to trick people, once they're not able to fool the masses into thinking that there is value in assets, where there isn't, then the whole house of cards comes crumbling down. That's how bubbles work. And the Fed has created the largest asset bubble in anybody's lifetime. And you've got some pretty mainstream, very, highbrow Wall Street executives making this same point now. So I think we're approaching a turning point, a point where the Fed is no longer able to trick people. I'm not sure where the line really is, or if there is a solid line, because obviously there's always been a contingent of people who didn't buy into the Fed's BS. But those people were a small enough minority to where they didn't matter. The fact that we were out of the market, or that some people, mistakenly shorted the market, because they were so confident that what the Fed was doing was wrong and, doubted the power of the Fed, we were not small enough, or we were too small to make a difference. But as that contingent grows, as people become more skeptical, as it becomes a little more socially acceptable to take your profits that you've made in the market, to sell some of your assets, to preserve the capital you've accumulated, that's when people take an opportunity for a moment of weakness in the market, for the next dip, to sell and to get out entirely and not to go back in, because they won't be fooled by the Fed, because they're not going to play the game anymore. If enough people do that, even if the Fed's able to, stop the bleeding somewhat and prevent a total free fall, the efficacy of their actions will prove to be greatly diminished. And they've already been greatly diminished. If you look at the slope of the Fed's balance sheet, it just keeps getting sharper. And yet economic growth in America, keeps getting flatter. Now, that's not to say that the stock market hasn't been going up. The Fed has much more, has a much greater impact on the stock market than the real economy. But they're just a couple of degrees removed from each other. And even in the case of the stock market, the Fed's, powers are being diminished. The charts show this. And once the Fed loses control that way, the upper middle class will be decimated, because even if a substantial portion of them wake up and get their money out of the market, everyone, whoever's not the first out of that door, it's a tiny door to squeeze out if you're selling, and so whoever's not one of the first people out of that door, they're going to get creamed, because even if they do the right thing and try and sell, they're going to have to sell at a much more deflated price. or rather a much less inflated price. And so then what you'll have is you'll have a contingent of upper middle class people who feel, economically disaffected, just like all these, more lower middle class people, and even, just straight up lower class people who have been put out of work because of all this virus stuff and are, one of the millions and millions of unemployed people. I've said that the upper crust of American society has been, largely shielded from this crisis because of the Fed's asset price manipulation. But if that goes away, and we have not only the lower classes, but also, the upper middle completely being, financially, ruined, well, then the civil unrest is only going to grow. Will the upper middle class riot in the streets the same way that the poor people do? No. But they will be able to make their voices heard in other ways. They have a more direct impact on our politics. And so once they finally join the party of the disaffected, it will be very interesting to see how that changes the game and how it may accelerate the collapse of the American system. Because as I've gone over the past, the stability of the political system is very much tied to the stability of the financial system. They support one another. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.